Have you ever wondered why she looked at you with that glow in her eyes? Not as if she were seeing you, but as if she were constructing you. She smiled not because of who you are, but because of who she thinks you might become. And in that instant, without you even noticing, something subtle but devastating took place. You were no longer a man, you were a projection. You thought you were being loved. You were being cast. Not as a partner but as a character. Not for your truth but for her unconscious myth. You could feel it, couldn't you? That strange tension beneath the warmth. That flicker of pressure behind the affection. Like she was measuring you against a script she never showed you. The lines she expected you to speak. The actions she hoped you'd perform. And like so many men before you, you accepted the role without question. You stepped into the spotlight, wearing a costume stitched together from childhood fears and romantic ideals. You smiled. You flexed. You performed. Because deep down you didn't want love. You wanted to be chosen. And that's where it all begins to rot. You've been taught, no, programmed, to believe that love is earned through sacrifice, that affection is the prize for self-erasure. So you learn to bend, to mold, to anticipate, to guess who she wants you to be, and to become that. But here's the truth no one told you. She wasn't loving you. She was loving the reflection of her own inner masculine. What Jung called the animus. That phantom male energy that lives inside every woman's psyche. And when that animus is undeveloped, unconscious or distorted, it turns men into dolls. Into hollow containers for a fantasy that never belonged to them. She doesn't mean to do it. That's the terrifying part. Most women have no idea they're doing it. Just like most men have no idea they're playing along. You thought her desire meant understanding. You thought her gaze meant recognition. But what you were feeling wasn't intimacy, it was projection. And the moment you deviate from the script, the spell breaks. You say something that wasn't in character. You stop performing. You let your mask slip. Suddenly she's colder, distant, confused. You feel like a stranger in her presence. And you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? The answer is simple. You stopped being the illusion. You stopped being the man she imagined and started being the man you are. And she didn't want you. She wanted him. The one in her head. Carl Jung warned us that most relationships are not unions between souls, but collisions between projections. And the cost is always the same, your identity. You think you're building something together. But what you're really building is a prison of expectation. A cage where your value is conditional on how well you play the role. And inside that cage, you begin to vanish. First it's small. You say yes when you mean maybe. You smile when you're irritated. You hold your tongue when your instinct screams. You let things slide. You call it compromise. She calls it compatibility. But Jung would call it something else. Self-betrayal. Because with every act of compliance, you trade a piece of your authenticity for the hope of being loved. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start to forget who you were before you put the mask on. This is not love. This is possession. You become possessed by the need to be needed. You surrender to her myth, to her fantasy, because somewhere along the way you were taught that being alone is worse than being false. So you stay. You adapt. You perform. And all the while, you drift further from your center, until you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the man staring back. Jung devoted his life to mapping the hidden architecture of the psyche. And one of his most brutal discoveries was this. A man who does not confront his own unconscious will become enslaved by the unconscious of others. Especially the women he desires. You see, when you haven't faced your own anima, your own inner feminine, you become magnetized by hers. Not by her, but by what she represents. Salvation, validation, completion. You don't see her clearly. You see hope. The hope that she will finally make you feel like enough. But she can't. She won't. That's not her job. Her role was never to heal your wound. That's your responsibility. Because the wound is not that she doesn't love you. The wound is that you abandoned yourself long before she ever showed up. And until you return to yourself, until you confront the emptiness you've been outsourcing to her, every relationship will feel like rejection. Every woman will feel like a test you're destined to fail. Because you're still trying to earn the right to exist. You don't need more strategies. You don't need dating hacks. You need to stand in the ashes of your own illusion and say, I will no longer be a character in someone else's dream. In the next section, we'll explore what it really means to walk away from the stage, and how to begin the brutal, liberating path of becoming real. So what happens when you stop playing the role? When you step off the stage, tear off the mask, and let the silence fall? It's terrifying, isn't it? Because you were never taught what to do with that silence. You were only taught to fill it, with charm, with effort, with obedience, with availability. The moment you stop performing, the applause dies. And without it, you feel invisible. But let me tell you something Jung understood better than most. The silence is not your enemy, it's your mirror. It shows you what's left when the performance ends. Shows you. And at first, it's unbearable. You feel hollow, untethered, as if the very ground beneath your feet was part of the illusion. But that's not weakness. That's the death of the false self. You're watching the version of you, built from craving and approval, collapse in real time. And yes, it feels like dying. Because in a way it is. Jung wrote that the path of individuation requires a man to die before he dies. Meaning, you must allow the false identities, the childish hopes, the masks and compensations to be burned away before anything authentic can grow in their place. But most men never make it that far. Because the world offers an easier path. Stay entertaining. Stay predictable. Stay agreeable. Be the man she can explain to her friends, bring to her parents, post on her feed. Not the man she doesn't understand, but can't stop thinking about. You see, the feminine isn't drawn to comfort. It's drawn to mystery, to energy, to presence. But you, in your eagerness to be loved, sacrificed your mystery. You revealed everything, gave everything. You became available, convenient, known. And in doing so, you became disposable. Because once she's read your entire script, once she knows your lines, your patterns, your triggers, your fears, there is no tension left. No polarity. No soul. The man who seeks validation will always feel like he's losing something. 'Cause he is. He's bleeding energy to win favor in a game that punishes authenticity. Jung saw this pattern in thousands of men. The deeper the hunger for approval, the more distorted the behavior. And at the root of that hunger lies one brutal truth. You fear being alone more than you fear being fake. And that fear is the leash. That fear is what makes you easy to control. Because as long as you dread your own company, you will betray yourself for the illusion of connection. You will let her define your value. You will turn every disagreement into a self-inquiry. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? How do I get her to see me again? But she never saw you. She saw her projection. She saw the echo of a father, a savior, a fantasy. And when the illusion cracked, she wasn't disappointed in you. She was mourning the myth. That's the sickness of unconscious love. No one is ever actually seen. Everyone is playing a role, hoping it earns them something. Safety, significance, salvation. But real love doesn't come from need. Comes from wholeness. And wholeness begins where performance ends. That's why Jung called individuation the only path to psychological freedom. Because it strips you of every false identity you constructed to survive. It forces you to meet the shadow, the parts of you you've buried, denied, avoided. The weakness, the rage, the jealousy, the shame. And you will not enjoy this process. You will lose people. You will lose illusions. You will lose parts of yourself that you once thought were yourself. But what remains, what survives, is real, solid, unshakable. A man who has faced his unconscious cannot be seduced by fantasy. He no longer asks women to carry his soul. He does not perform to be picked. Because he has chosen himself. And that man, he is dangerous, not in a violent sense but in a way that unsettles the entire social fabric. He cannot be manipulated by flattery. He cannot be guilt by disapproval. He no longer runs from solitude. He wears it like armor. He knows that intimacy is a gift, not a strategy. He does not offer himself to be saved. He stands whole, watching the world with clear eyes, no longer begging to be seen. And this is where the real irony lives. The moment you no longer need her to choose you, she sees you, not as a fantasy, not as a project, but as a mirror. And what she sees may terrify her, because if she's still possessed by her own unconscious animus, if she's still projecting her inner masculine outward, then your authenticity is not comforting. It's threatening. You won't follow the script. You won't play the role. You won't collapse just to keep her fantasy alive. And for the first time in her life, she's faced with a man who will not bend. A man who cannot be bought with sex, or swayed with silence. A man who refuses to be tamed by guilt. And in that moment, she has a choice. She can meet you as a woman who has done her own work, or she can run back to the theater. But you remain. You no longer chase. You no longer prove. You simply are. And that presence is what the world fears most. In the final section, we'll go even deeper into what happens when two whole people meet, and what it means to love without projection. When two whole people meet, it doesn't look like the movies. There are no grand gestures, no declarations of eternal need, no desperate grasping at each other's hands as if the other were oxygen. There's stillness, recognition, two flames that don't merge to become one, but burn fiercely side by side. You don't fill each other. You don't complete each other. Because there's nothing missing to begin with. She doesn't look at you with the hunger of someone searching for salvation. She looks at you with the quiet strength of someone who has already walked through fire, who has met her own animus, who has dismantled her fantasies, one illusion at a time. She doesn't ask you to play a role. She doesn't require you to dance for her approval. She doesn't test your love with manipulation or punish your truth with withdrawal. She just sees you, because she's finally learned to see herself. And in her eyes, you no longer find a script to perform. You find a space to be. That's the love Jung was pointing to. Not the explosive, addictive infatuation that burns bright and dies fast. But the terrifying, dangerous love that emerges only when both have faced their shadow. When both have walked the long, lonely road of individuation. This love isn't needy. It isn't safe. It doesn't demand, it reveals. It strips you of everything performative. It invites truth and expels fantasy. But most people never get there. 'Cause most people quit. They quit when the mirror gets too sharp. When the loneliness of self-discovery feels too raw. When the applause fades and they mistake that silence for failure. Not realizing that it is through the silence that the real man is born. You don't reach this place by accident. You get here by refusing to betray yourself, even when it costs you affection. By holding your truth, even when it scares her. By standing in solitude, even when the world screams at you to settle down, be agreeable, be chosen. But you are no longer a man who needs to be chosen. You have chosen yourself, fully, unapologetically, relentlessly. And that choice, that sacred, private, internal choice, makes you untouchable. It doesn't make you arrogant. Makes you rooted. You don't chase. You don't manipulate. You don't beg. You attract, not with tactics or charm, but with the gravity of someone who knows exactly who he is. With the calm authority of a man who carries his own soul. And yes, this unsettles people. Because most people are still addicted to performance. Most people don't want connection. They want compliance. They don't want truth. They want validation. But you're done living in someone else's story. You're no longer the actor. You're the author. And when a woman finally sees that, truly sees that, she will either rise to meet you or disappear. Either outcome is a gift. Because you don't need her to stay in order to feel whole. You don't need her love to confirm your worth. And that's exactly why the right woman will trust you with hers. Not because you fought for it, but because you didn't need it. She will not demand that you shrink. She will not fear your silence. She will not interpret your stillness as weakness. 'Cause she has her own. And when that happens, when two individuated souls stand face to face, it's not a romance. It's a revolution. A rejection of the false scripts passed down through centuries. A refusal to perform, to pretend, to play the old games of masks and manipulation. And in that sacred space, something rare is born. Not love that needs, but love that chooses. Not love that takes, but love that honors. Not love that controls, but love that witnesses. This kind of connection cannot be manufactured, cannot be forced, cannot be performed into existence. It is only available to those who have endured the fire of self-confrontation and come out whole. But let me be honest with you. Most of you won't get there. Because most of you will settle. Settle for being picked instead of becoming. Settle for being liked instead of being known. Settle for being desired instead of being respected. You will bend, you will mold, you will perform. And you'll call it love. But it won't be. It will be projection, fantasy, transaction. And one day, when the mask slips and the performance fails, you'll feel the familiar sting of being replaced. And you'll whisper to yourself the lie you've always believed. I wasn't enough. But you were never meant to be enough for her illusion. You were meant to wake up from it. And now here you are, standing at the edge of that awakening. Maybe for the first time. Maybe trembling. Maybe terrified. But that means the old self is dying. Let it burn. Let the parts of you that lived for her approval, for her praise, for her permission, die. And in their place, let something terrifyingly real emerge. Because in the end, the woman you're searching for doesn't live out there. She is the reflection of the part of yourself you abandoned. And only when you reclaim it, only when you stop running from your own soul, will you finally attract the one who sees you. Not as a fantasy, not as a savior, not as a script, but as a man. No mask, no performance, no role, just presence, just truth, just you. And that is where love finally begins. So now what? You've heard the truth. You've felt it in your chest. The discomfort, the clarity, the raw, unfiltered recognition that the man you've been wasn't chosen. He was convinced to be chosen. He was conditioned to perform. But not anymore. Because today you start to remember. You remember that you were never born to be a puppet. Never born to live as a projection. Never born to dance for love like a trained animal begging for scraps of affection. You were born to stand rooted in your own soul. To claim the ground beneath your feet. To love yourself. Not in the narcissistic way they mock, but in the fierce, silent, self-honoring way Jung spoke of. The kind of love that doesn't seek mirrors to feel whole. The kind of love that radiates outward and attracts others who have also done the work. From this day forward, walk differently. Not with arrogance, but with depth. Not with ego, but with integrity. The woman you're looking for is not out there waiting to rescue you. She's out there waiting to recognize you. But only if you first recognize yourself. Because you don't become a man by being chosen. You become a man by choosing yourself. And now it's your move. In the next chapter, we'll go even deeper. But for now, sit with this. What would your life look like if you stopped performing and started becoming?